Blood on the Wattle, Massacres and Maltreatment of Aboriginal Australians since 1788 by Bruce Elder sheds light on the dark and often ignored history of violence against Aboriginal Australians. The book compiles detailed accounts of 25 frontier massacres that occurred across Australia, highlighting the tragic and devastating impact on Indigenous communities. Here are some important themes, notes, and quotes from the book. Scope of violence. The book reveals the extent of violence and maltreatment suffered by Aboriginal Australians since the arrival of European settlers in 1788. It emphasizes that these massacres were not isolated incidents but a widespread pattern of brutality. Historical documentation. Elder draws on historical documents, letters, diaries, and oral histories to provide evidence for the massacres. This meticulous research brings to light events that have often been glossed over or omitted from official narratives. Impact on Indigenous communities. The book examines the deep and lasting impact of these massacres on Aboriginal communities. It explores how the violence led to displacement, trauma, loss of culture, and a legacy of suffering that persists to this day. Systematic nature. Elder argues that these massacres were not spontaneous acts of violence, but often planned and executed systematically by European settlers. This challenges the prevailing narrative that portrays these events as conflicts between settlers and Indigenous people. Land dispossession. The book highlights how the massacres were often linked to the dispossession of Aboriginal land. European settlers sought to remove Indigenous populations from areas they wanted to claim for agriculture and settlement. Cultural erasure. The book underscores the cultural impact of the violence, as many Indigenous languages, traditions, and practices were lost due to the massacres and subsequent oppression. Resistance and resilience. Despite the overwhelming violence, the book also portrays instances of Aboriginal resistance and resilience in the face of adversity. It acknowledges the strength and endurance of Indigenous communities. Reconciliation and acknowledgement. Elder's work contributes to the broader dialogue on reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. It emphasizes the importance of acknowledging the past and addressing historical injustices. Quotes from the book. The killing frenzy which had overtaken the settlers was barbaric in the extreme. The dispossession, the constant threat of violence, the introduction of European diseases and the systematic destruction of the traditional way of life caused widespread suffering. The massacres were not clashes or skirmishes. They were cold-blooded butcheries of people who did not have the means to defend themselves. Blood on the Wattle is a sobering and vital work that confronts the dark chapters of Australian history, urging readers to acknowledge and reckon with the atrocities committed against Indigenous communities.